good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Medieval Storytime with the Creative Contessa. I am the Contessa, and today we are in Daegu, South Korea at the Governor's Palace, reconstructed and restored to its beautiful 17th century state. So I thought this would make a fine place to read a tale that originally dates to 14th century Italy that is brought to us in a early 17th century English translation. So, as always, if you are watching this as a recording and you have any questions, then pop them in the comments under the recorded video. If you're in the live stream, as Haas is today, and Richard, it's lovely to see you again, then of course pop them in the live stream. So how's everyone doing today? Wipe the camera, we'll see. It may or may not help. There's actually quite a glare here today. Yeah, it may or may not help, we'll see. Okay, Ryan is off shopping, so today he might be monitoring from somewhere else. HH, lovely to see you. So we're in this beautiful park. It is a gorgeous May day, and so I thought we would read a story from the Decameron, Il Decamerone, written by Giovanni Boccaccio in the 1350s, or compiled by him, but also authored in the sense of he gives his own voice and his own nuance and sense of humor to these stories. So some of you have been in my live streams lately, and you've seen me commenting on how much I resent and absolutely despise Netflix's rendering of the Decameron, because it has nothing to do with this amazing, amazing book. It doesn't recount any of the stories contained therein. None of the characters reflect the actual characters in here. The clothing is terrible. It provides yet more horrible misrepresentations of medieval life, and especially medieval people's interactions. So I thought I would read to you a real story from the Decameron, one that is very saucy and very inappropriate by many modern standards. So if you're looking for some kind of straight-laced story filled with moral people behaving in a moral manner, this is not this medieval story time for you. This is a story that was meant to wring peals of laughter from its listeners. Yeah, Big Racer, I know it's middle of the night in America. Yeah, everything's been as well as can be expected in the dumpster fire that is the world right now. We'll see how well things continue to go. I'm expecting that maybe this summer there will be no flights going anywhere, but when we run out of jet fuel. Anyway, conversation for another topic. Yeah. Turkey, thank you for joining us from Turkey. I was just in Turkey back in October. Been there many times. Love it. Great country, great people, fantastic food, beautiful historical sites. Lovely place to visit. Very hospitable, very welcoming. Okay, so this story, so for those who are not familiar with Il Decamerone, the basic premise is that it's the Black Death, so 1348 Florence, and a group of aristocrats, of nobles, are fleeing the city because people are dying by the hundreds every day of the bubonic plague. And at that time, it was acknowledged that if you were close to sick people, you would get sick yourself. So they decide to flee to the countryside to an estate in Fiesole, a town that is about 5 miles from Florence. I know that doesn't seem far by modern standards. In the 15th century, that was a good distance to go, especially considering how small Florence was then compared to now. So they flee to this country estate and they spend 10 days there disporting, dancing, singing, reciting poetry, feasting, playing games, and key amongst the activities, telling stories. Now, the thing about their society of this 10 aristocrats, there are 7 ladies and 3 men, is they appoint a monarch for the day, a different monarch of the day every day. And this monarch of the day determines the sort of activities in which they shall partake, and also, very importantly, the theme for the day's stories. And then, in turn, each of them, one of 10 stories per day, tells a story that aligns with that theme. So I'm going to be reading to you a story from the ninth day, the sixth novel, as it's called in 17th century English. So originally it was composed in vernacular in Italian, meaning vernacular meaning not Latin. It was composed in Italian, Tuscan, and many people say that Boccaccio and Dante, that their Italian, their Tuscan Italian, is in essence the origins of modern Italian. The way Chaucerian English is in many ways the origins of modern English. And in fact, Geoffrey Chaucer actually knew Boccaccio. They met each other, and Chaucer read Il Decameron. He read the Decameron. And so there are really good theories that say that Chaucer's Canterbury Tales were based on Boccaccio's Il Decamerone, the idea of a frame of people gathering together for some purpose or another and telling different stories. And that many of the stories that Chaucer actually tells are not original. They are folk tales that he then adapts to his own voice and his own audience and his own purpose. So this is Il Decamerone is basically Italy's Canterbury Tales, or one might say that Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is England's Il Decamerone. So just like Chaucer's folk tales are often bawdy and absolutely delightfully tasteless with not a single iota of political correctness about them, so too is today's tale. So be prepared, everyone. Okay, questions before we start. Questions before we start. So the basic format will be, I will read the story all the way through to the end with very few to no interruptions on my part, and I will not be looking at the comments during that time. At the end, once I have read all the way through, I encourage you to then ask your questions. If you have questions about what we've read in the story, or questions about medieval living history, if you have questions about me. We will also then go back through the story section by section, and I will comment on and add information to any sections to put them in their proper context. So about this translation was done by a man named John Florio, a man by the name of John Florio. He was a bilingual English-Italian speaker in late Elizabethan, early Jacobean England, so early Stuart England. His one parent was Italian, one parent was English, and so he was uniquely positioned to produce a very good translation of a medieval Italian work. He also actually produced, I think, the earliest Italian-English dictionary, at least the earliest Italian-English dictionary that I have found, which is actually very useful in looking up the definitions for some of these much older Italian words and getting a sense for what they meant in the 17th century, the 16th century, and earlier versus what those Italian words might mean now. So he also produced this fantastic translation, which means that this English is in the style of 17th century English. It is much more like he was a contemporary of Shakespeare, in fact. And so you might recognize many of the words, some of the pronunciations, much of the syntax that you see in Shakespeare, you will see here, with the exception that Shakespeare is generally writing in a rhythmic style, right? Whereas this is all in prose. So there is no rhythm, there is no rhyme the way there is in a Shakespearean story. Yeah, but yeah, Shakespeare, we love Shakespeare. Okay, so everyone prepare for the sixth novel on the ninth day of Il Decamerone. So, on the plain of Mugnone, nearer to Florence dwelt, not long since, an honest, mean man who kept a poor inn, or ostery for travelers, where they might have some slender entertainment for their money. As he was but a poor man, so his house afforded but very small receipt of guests, not lodging any but on necessity, and such as he had some knowledge of. This honest poor host had a woman sufficiently fair to his wife, by whom he also had 2 children, the one a comely young maiden, aged about 15 years, and the other a sonna, not fully as yet a year old, and sucking on the mother's breast. a comely youthful gentleman of our city, became amorously affected to the damoiselle, resorting thither divers times as he travelled on the way, to express how much he did respect her. And she, accounting her fortune none of the meanest, to be beloved by so youthful a gallant, declared such virtuous and modest demeanour as might deserve his best opinion of her, so that their love grew to an equal sympathy and mutual contentment of them both, in expectation of further effects. He being named Panuccio, and she Nicoletta. The hate of affection thus increasing day by day, Panuccio grew exceedingly desirous to enjoy the fruits of his long continued liking, and diverse devices mustered in his brain how he might compass one night's lodging in her father's house, whereof he knew every part and parcel, as not doubting to effect what he desired, yet undiscovered by any but the maid herself. According as his intention aimed, so he longed to put it in execution, and having imparted his mind to an honest, loyal friend named Adriano, who was acquainted with the course of his love, hiring 2 horses and having portmanteaus behind them filled with matters of no moment, they departed from Florence as if they had some great journey to ride. Having spent the daytime where themselves best pleased, dark night being entered, they arrived on the plain of Mugnone, where, as if they were come from parts of Romagna, they rode directly to this poor inn, and knocking at the door, the honest host, being familiar and friendly to all comers, opened the door, when Panuccio spake in this manner to him. Good man, we must request one night's lodging with you, for we thought to have reached so far as Florence. But, dark night preventing us, you see at what late hour we are come hither. Signor Panuccio, answered the host, it is not unknown to you how unfitting my poor house is for entertaining such guests as you are. Nevertheless, seeing you are overtaken by so unreasonable an hour, and no other place is near for your receipt, I gladly lodge you so well as I can. When they were dismounted from their horses and entered into the simple inn, having taken order for feeding their horses, they accepted such provision as the place and time afforded, requesting the host to sup with them. Now, I am to tell you that there was but one small chamber in the house, wherein stood 3 beds, as best the host had devised to place them, 2 of them standing by the wall's side, and the 3rd fronting them both, but with such close and narrow passage as very hardly could one step between them. The best of these 3 beds was appointed for the gentlemen, and therein they laid them down to rest, but sleep they could not, albeit they dissembled it very formally. They pretended. In the 2nd bed was Nicoletta, the daughter, lodged by herself, and her father and her mother in the 3rd. And because she was to give the child succa all the night time, the cradle wherein the baby lay stood close by their bedsides, because the child is crying or any other occasion concerning it should not disquiet the gentleman. Panuccio, having subtly observed all this, and in what manner they went to bed, after such a space of time, as he imagined them to be all fast asleep, he arose very softly, and stealing to the bed of Nicoletta, lay down gently by her. And albeit she seemed somewhat afraid at first, yet when she perceived who it was, She rather bade him welcome than shewed herself anyway discontented. Now, while Panuccio continued thus with the maid, it fortuned that a cat threw down somewhat in the house, the noise whereof awaked the wife, and fearing greater harm than indeed had happened, she arose without a candle and went groping in the dark towards the place where she heard that noise. Adriano, who had no other meaning but, well, found occasion also to rise about some natural necessity, and making his passage in the dark, stumbled on the child's cradle in the way where the woman had set it, and being unable to pass by without removing it from the place, took it and set it by his own bedside, and having done the business for which he rose, returned to his bed again, never remembering to set the cradle where he first found it. Foreshadowing. The wife, having found the thing thrown down, being of no value or moment, cared not for lighting any candle, but, rating the cat, returned back, feeling for the bed where her husband lay, but finding not the cradle there, she said to herself, "What a foolish woman am I, that I cannot tell myself what I do? Instead of my husband's bed, I'm going to both my guests." Oh, no, she's not. So, stepping on a little further, she found the childish cradle and laid herself down by Adriano, thinking she had gone right to her husband. Adriano, being not yet fallen asleep, feeling the hostess in bed with him, took advantage of so fair an occasion offered, and what he did is no business of mine. As I heard, neither found the woman any fault. Matters coming to pass in this strange manner, and Panuccio fearing lest sleep seizing on him, he might disgrace the maid's reputation, taking his kind farewell of her, with many kisses and sweet embraces, returned again to his own bed. But, meeting with the cradle in his way, and thinking it stood by the hostess' bed, as truly it did so at first, went back to the cradle and stepped into the hostess' bed indeed, who awaked upon his very entrance, albeit he slept very soundly before. Panuccio, supposing that he was laid down by his loving friend Adriano, merrily said to the hosta, "I protest to thee, as I am a gentleman, Nicoletta is a dainty, delicate wench, and worthy to be a very good man's wife. This night she hath given me the sweetest entertainment, as the best prince in the world can wish no better, and I have kissed her most kindly for it." The hosta, hearing these news, which seemed very unwelcome to him, said first to himself, "What makes such a devil here in my bed?" Afterward, being more rashly angry than well advised, he said to Panuccio, "Canst thou make vaunt of such a monstrous villainy, or thinkest thou that heaven hath not due vengeance in store to requite all wicked deeds of darkness? If all should sleep, yet I have courage sufficient to right my wrong, and yet as old as I am, thou shalt be sure to find it." Our amorous Panuccio, being none of the wisest young men in the world, perceiving his error, sought not to amend it, as well he might have done, with some quaint strain of wit, carried in quick and cleanly manner, but angrily answered, "What shall I find that darest do to me? Am I any way afraid of thy threatenings?" The hostess, imagining she was in bed with her husband, said to Adriano, "Hark, husband, I think our guests are quarreling together. I hope they will do no harm to one another." Adriano, laughing outright, answered, "Let them alone, and become friends again as they fell out. Perhaps they drank too much yesternight." The woman, perceiving that it was her husband that quarreled, and distinguishing the voice of Adriano from his, knew presently where she was, and with whom. Wherefore, having wit at will, and desirous to cloud an error unadvisedly committed, and with no willing consent of herself, without returning any more words, Presently she rose, and taking the cradle with the child in it, removed it thence to her daughter's bedside, although she had no light to help her, and afterward went to bed to her, where, as if she were but newly awaked, called her husband to understand what angry speeches had passed between him and Panuccio. Didst thou not hear, the host replied, saying, Didst thou not hear him, wife, brag and boast how he hath lien this night with our daughter Nicoletta? Husband, quoth she, he is no honest gentleman, if he should say so, and believe me, it is a manifest lie, for I am in bed with her myself, and never yet closed mine eyes together since the first hour I laid me down. It is unmannerly done of him to speak it, and you are little less than a loggerhead, if you do believe it. Gaslighting before there were gaslights. This proceedeth from your bibbing and swilling yesterday, which, as it seemeth, maketh you to walk about the room in your sleepe, dreaming of wonders in the night season. It were no great sin if you brake your neck to teach you keep a fairer quarter. And how cometh it to pass, Signor Panuccio could not keep himself in his own bed? Adriano, on the other side, perceiving how wisely the women excused her own shame and her daughter's, to back her in a business so cunningly begun, he called to Panuccio, saying, Have not I told thee 100 times that thou art not fit to lie anywhere out of thine own lodging? What a shame is this base imperfection to thee by rising and walking thus in the night time, according as thy dreamest do wantonly delude thee, and cause thee to forsake thy bed, telling nothing but lies and fables, yet avouching them for manifest truths? Assuredly, this will procure no mean peril unto thee. Come hither, and keep it in thine own bed for mere shame. When the honest-meaning host heard what his own wife and Adriano had confirmed, he was verily persuaded that Panuccio spake in a dream all this while. And to make it more constantly apparent, Panuccio, being now grown wiser by others' example, lay talking and blundering to himself, even as if dreams or perturbations of the mind did much molest him with strange distractions in frantic a manner, which the host perceiving and compassionating his case, as one man should do another's, he took him by the shoulders, jogging and hunching him, saying, Awake, Signor Panuccio, and get you gone hence to your own bed. Panuccio, yawning and stretching out his limbs, was with unusual groanness and respirations, such as better could be hardly dissembled, seemed to wake as out of a trance, and calling his friend Adriano, said, Adriano, is it day that thou dost waken me? It may be day or night, replied Adriano, for both in these fits are alike to thee. Arise, man, for shame, and come to thine lodging. Then fainting to be much troubled and sleepy, he arose from the host and went to Adriano's bed. When it was day, and all in the house risen, the host began to smile at Panuccio, mocking him with his idle dreaming and talking in the night. So, falling from one merry matter to another, yet without any mislike at all, the gentlemen, having their horses prepared and their portmanteaus fastened behind, drinking to their host, mounted on horseback, and they rode away towards Florence, no less contented with the manner of occasions happened than the effects they sorted to. Afterward, other courses were taken for the continuance of this begun pleasure with Nicoletta, who made her mother believe that Panuccio did nothing else but dream. And the mother herself, remembering how kindly Adriano had used her, a fortune not expected by her before, was more than half of the mind that she did then dream also, while she was waking. The end. Oh, Brandon, this is a comedy story from 14th century Italy. As I said at the beginning of this story, this is definitely not a story for those who want politically correct. This is a Bawdy story about about the way people would go about engaging in love liaisons in an era when you really just couldn't that easily. Yeah, Richard Copeland. Yeah. Yeah, obviously to modern sensibilities, there is much to object to this story, but this helps you. Stories like this help us understand how people thought differently in that era. What was considered funny and amusing and harmless in the 14th century obviously isn't the same anymore. But it's important that when we read stories like this, we try not to read them through a modern lens, because that will lead us astray. It's the same way that we shouldn't interpret the actions of historical figures through our modern lens of morality, because our modern lens of morality is nothing like it was 500 years ago. There are very different ideas of what made a leader great 500 years ago than what makes a leader great now, right? And there's a different idea of what counts as cruelty now than what counted as cruelty 100 years ago even. So I think it's dangerous and incorrect of us to judge past people by modern standards, is my point. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a key plot point in this story that wouldn't work in the modern world. And for those just joining, welcome to Medieval Storytime with the creative Contessa. Actually, I don't have my wallet at all anymore. It was lost about a week and a half ago, so we're still looking for it. So I don't even have a wallet. But in Korea, I don't really need one. It's okay. Anyway, one of the key plot drivers in this story is the darkness. And in the developed world, in the modern developed world, it is very hard, it can be hard or almost impossible to understand the level of darkness that 14th century people would have experienced in even a very civilized city like Florence, right? At night, it was dark, very dark. Extra dark. Oh, Ushik, appreciate those gifts. Thank you so much. Thank you for gifting memberships out so people can give it a try. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being a member. Right, so now we have all sorts of ambient light. There is so much light pollution in the night sky in most of the world. Like North Korea is one of the few places where it might actually be truly dark. And if you look at a satellite map of Asia at nighttime, you can see the outline of North Korea almost exactly with one tiny speck of light that represents Pyongyang. Anyway, so there was a darkness so profound that you couldn't see anything, and that it would be very easy to mistaken people's identities. It would be very easy to not see the person next to whom you are lying in bed. Because also shutters were closed at night, either to keep the cool air from coming in or for safety's sake. So there wouldn't be, even if there was a moon, there wouldn't be moonlight coming into your residence, to your home. So this whole story turns on the idea that it is so dark that it is easy for people to mistake not only their bed, but the people in the bed. Candles, that is an excellent question. Thank you so much, Hess. So candles were very, very expensive before the 20th century. Candles were very, very expensive. In this era, there were several kinds of light sources. Beeswax candles, the most expensive. Massively expensive. Chandlers, beeswax chandlers it was a very good profession. You got paid very well. Beeswax was not something that is still not something that can really be produced in massive quantities. Even now, beeswax candles are expensive. And there were no paraffin candles, there were no synthetic candles, there were no soy candles. Beeswax was your candle. And beeswax was expensive. So you would only light beeswax candles if you really absolutely needed to. And that is commented on here. The wife decides she doesn't need to. And I was going to comment on that, Haas. The wife decides she doesn't need to light a candle because she doesn't want to waste the candle. She doesn't want to basically spend money on light she doesn't feel she needs, because she knows her own home well enough, she thinks that she can find her way around in the dark. And she does. Her system works. And it would have worked had it not been for the cradle getting moved, right? And the cradle only gets moved by accident. That wasn't a purposeful move on Adriano's part, right? Adriano needs to get up and I forget what that charming turn of phrase that was so fantastic for going and relieving himself in the night. We'll get to it when we go through section by section, but that's why she doesn't like the candles. There were two other sources of light, artificial light in this era. Oil lamps, but again, oil's expensive. Oil isn't cheap. Even if you're using tallow or lard as the oil for your oil lamp, it's still not cheap. And usually you wouldn't use tallow or lard for your oil lamp because it kind of needs to be liquid on its own, and those solidify at a much lower temperature than oil does, right? So you would use something like olive oil, which is not cheap either, for your oil lamp. Or you would have rush lights. And rush lights were basically, you would take reeds and rushes, this kind of reed. You would strip out the core of the reed, and it's basically like a sponge, and you would soak that in lard or tallow, some kind of rendered animal fat. And then there would actually be a rush light holder. And I actually have a replica candlestick at home that has a rush light holder as part of it. And then you would light it, and it would produce a single flame that would not be very bright, and it would smell not great, especially if it's lard. So that was like the poorest artificial lighting option, was the rush light. Candles were the most expensive, which is why any kind of great hall that was illuminated for a feast, that was a massive expense. Just to illuminate a great hall for a banquet and a ball was a crazy bit of conspicuous consumption. And in fact, when we look at inventories from the 14th and 15th century, or expense accounts, when we look at expense accounts from the 14th and 15th century, and we look specifically for expenditures for major events, one of the biggest expenditures in preparation for the event is candles. Yeah, so yeah, candles would not, it would, yeah, very, very expensive. I mean, beeswax candles are expensive now. Beeswax candles are $3 each for a 6-inch taper, right? That's not cheap. They don't last very long, so that's not really that cheap. Haas says they used whale oil in the past. Not everywhere. Whale oil was not very common, depending on where you lived, and it was not a very common thing in medieval Europe. Whale hunting is dangerous. It is not easy to hunt whales, so it depends on where you lived. If you lived in a place where whale hunting was a major industry, then yes. But whale hunting was not a major industry in the Middle Ages. No, they didn't know. Not in Europe anyway. So no, whale oil was not that common in that time. And it wouldn't have been cheap either, honestly. Yeah, so yes, the whale hunting was done, but it wasn't particularly common. Yeah, were oil lamps accessible? Yes, oil lamps were actually very cheap. Oil lamps were made of clay. I actually have a couple of replica medieval oil lamps at home. I'm now in a 17th century, let me show you. I'm now in a 17th century governor's palace here in Daegu, South Korea. Isn't it beautiful? Right? So I don't have any of my things at home. But tomorrow, if you join me for my medieval cooking party, tomorrow evening, Seoul time, middle of the day Europe, early morning US, I will show you some of my cool medieval lighting lamps and whatnot. So yeah, oil lamps would have been relatively inexpensive. Ceramics were actually basic ceramics. Pottery was pretty inexpensive. It was the plastic of the Middle Ages, basically. It was pretty consumable. It was cheap. It was easy to make, relatively speaking. So ceramics are what everyone could afford. And so the poorest of the poor had ceramic pots, ceramic cooking pots, ceramic oil lamps they could have had, but they probably couldn't have afforded the oil to go into it. But the lamp itself, the oil lamp itself, they're basically like a little bowl, just a little bowl with a pouring spout basically in which the wick sits, and then the wick just kind of curls in the oil and wicks up the oil, and then you light the end. And if you look on this channel, if you check out, go to my Pensic playlist, PENNSIC, and scroll through, I've recorded shorts of just how bright a medieval oil lamp is, and I actually have a couple of shorts of me sewing by medieval oil lamp. So you can see it's really bright. The oil lamps are very, very bright. They're shockingly bright, in fact, but it still would have been an expense to just have them burning for no good reason. So they wouldn't have. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. The Europeans made big houses but never thought of a way to illuminate them constantly. No, Haas, you're misunderstanding. People who could afford big houses could afford candles for them. That's just how it was. Not everyone could afford big houses, though. It's a misconception that everyone in Europe had a big house. The reality is that most people lived in relatively small homes. They were servants in a big home, and then they lived in a big home, but it wasn't their home. Yeah, so people who could afford big houses could afford to illuminate them, but it was a major expense, and it was acknowledged that it was a major expense. It's like people now who live in huge houses and can afford to heat them and air condition them all the time. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can afford to heat and air condition their homes all the time. Not in the US, not in Korea. Same idea, conspicuous consumption. Yep. It's just, yeah, oil, but whale oil is not cheap either, Haas. No, very, very little was inexpensive in the pre-industrial world. Almost everything was relatively expensive in the pre-industrial world because mechanization has made everything very cheap now. So much is so cheap now that never would have been cheap before. But before mechanization, before the Industrial Revolution, many things were, almost everything was way more expensive than it is now. That's just a fact. That's just a truth. Yep. Okay, so. Okay, so let's go through our story bit by bit. So this story about Nicoletta actually makes an appearance in a couple of other stories, and they're pretty funny too. And if we have time, I might read you the story that actually precedes this one that's about Nicoletta. She's a right lusty wench, as he's a right dainty wench, as Panuccio says, hysterically. Okay, so on the plain of Mugnone, near to Florence, dwelt an honest, mean man who kept a poor inn or ostery for travelers. So an ostery and osteria, those of you who have traveled in Italy or who have been to Italy, you have seen osterias, right? And osteria it's originally, it was an inn, it was a tavern, it was a pub that would serve food, but also offer some small amount of lodging. And so the 17th century word for that is ostery. I think we need to reintroduce the word ostery to the English language, right? And so we have here this family. We have the host, right? And he has a young maiden who's about 15 years old, and she has a baby brother, right? And then we've got this comely youthful gentleman of our city, that's Florence. So Mugnone is out there in the countryside, right? So it's a village out in the countryside. Florence is the great shining city on the river. It's not on a hill. It's basically in a swamp. The great shining city in a swamp. And I love Florence, but it's in a swamp. It's on the river, and it's a mosquito paradise. Anyone who's been there knows it's a mosquito paradise. Anyway, so we have this young gentleman who has traveled. Whenever he goes out, he has gone through this house, and that's how he has met Nicoletta, as we find out her name is. And they basically take to each other, right? They start courting each other, and it's very clear that it is a mutual relationship, right? Because it says, Boccaccio says, a comely, youthful gentleman of our city became amorously affected to the damozel, resorting thither diverse times as he traveled on the way, to express how much he did respect her. And one of the things I appreciate so much about Boccaccio is his dry sense of humor, right? He has no problem basically couching very crude situations in very subtle as he would have, as Florio would have said in the 17th century, in subtle terms, right? So it's not gross and openly raunchy. It's very subtle, right? So he resorted thither to tell how much he expressed how much he did respect her. Just respect. It's all respect, right? Nothing but respect. And she, accounting her fortune none of the meanest, to be beloved by so youthful a gallant, declared such virtuous and modest demeanor as might deserve his best opinion of her, right? So she then, enjoying this courtship, this being courted by this youthful, and it's a gentleman, right? So this isn't a peasant, he's not a farmer, he's not a laborer, he's not an artisan, he's a gentleman. So he's of the gentry, right? So here, this innkeeper's daughter is being courted by someone who's well above her station. And so she's obviously flattered by that, but she's probably hoping there will be benefits. And honestly, there probably would be. There are court cases from 15th century Florence of what I would call lawsuits by women who marry men of unequal status, by which I mean women who are about on the social hierarchy where Nicoletta is, and they end up marrying a gentleman through basically a common law marriage, so they claim, and then when their husband later marries someone more of their status, they claim that they were already married as per common law. So this is actually something that seems to have happened more often than one might expect in 15th century Florence, where a gentleman esteems, respects a lovely young lady of lower status, and she ends up in those cases, she ended up benefiting. The woman's name, her name was Giovanna, I don't remember her last name, but she ended up, for several years, he set up a home for her, apparently. She had a very nice home that he paid for. He bought her clothing, he bought her gifts. So she did benefit from this pseudo marriage, right? So Nicoletta is probably supposed to be one of these ladies who is hoping that that her relationship with this much better heeled gentleman will benefit her, right? Yeah, okay, just checking the comments, okay. Okay, if you have any questions, pop them in the live chat, everyone. I will answer them. So, but the interesting thing that Boccaccio notes here is that she declared such virtuous and modest demeanor, which means she might not actually be either virtuous or modest, but she acts that way to get his affection. And honestly, this feels so real to me because this is how we all act when we date, right? When we are courting someone, when we are in those initial stages of courtship and getting to know each other in a potential romance, we all act the way we think our target wants us to act. We behave in the way that we think our desired, our beloved will find the most attractive. And Nicoletta, this 14th century young lady, is no different. So I just love that connection between the medieval world and the modern one that shows us that as different as some things were and are, some things don't change, actually. Question, how was it like back in time where people to get married? Let me see. How was it like back in time? Did people get married and didn't have communication? It depended on your status. You're trying to ask, I guess, if people got married before they had even met? That often happened in the pre-modern world, in the pre-20th century world. That was very common. But it would depend on your status, on your socioeconomic status, where you were on the hierarchy. The higher up you were, the less likely it was that you would have met your potential spouse. Man or woman, didn't matter. Because those marriages especially were really meant to be dynastic arrangements or business arrangements if you're talking about a wealthy merchant family. But actually at the merchant class, you were more likely to have met your potential spouse because it's probably the son of your father's business partner or the son of your father's coworker, right? So you were more likely to have met in the artisanal classes or the laborer classes or the middle class or the peasant class. But if you're talking in the aristocracy, you're much less likely to have met the person that you're going to marry. Sometimes, if you're lucky, maybe you're the princess and the man you're going to marry actually fostered in your father's household as children and maybe you grew up together. That's the case of Edward III and Philippa of Hainaut, right? So they actually knew each other before they got married. So, you know, that can happen. And the other way around, she went into his household. Anyway, that can happen, but it doesn't necessarily happen. But marriage was not about love. It really was not. It was about economic circumstances. It was about political circumstances. And that is really true for most of the pre-modern world. And that is still true in many places in the 21st century world. So yeah, let me see. Oh, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that. Yeah, so in this case, there is probably little chance that our gentleman Panuccio is going to marry Nicoletta. but he might take her as a mistress, and he might treat her like a wife eventually. Maybe he might set up a separate household for her until such time that he actually gets married himself. The thing we need to focus on here is he's a youthful gentleman. In Florence, in the 14th and 15th centuries, men usually didn't marry until they were in their 30s, and that was just normal. The legal age of majority in Florence was 25 for men. So it was acknowledged that maybe it took them longer to mature than it took the women, and that's probably true considering the sorts of misdemeanor crimes I see these gentlemen getting accused of, vandalism and rioting in the streets, violence, gang violence, that kind of thing, right? So this youthful gentleman probably has maybe 10 years or more before he's going to get married anyway. So that gives him plenty of time to enjoy his relationship with Nicoletta. Yeah. Okay, so we have Nicoletta putting on her best self, whatever she thinks this gentleman Panuccio washes, and we have Panuccio stopping by whenever he can on his way. So Florence, this is a misconception of the Middle Ages, that people didn't travel, that they never left their village, that they never traveled more than a few miles from their home, and that is not true at all. Not for any level of society, because even at the working in the fields farmer level, even at the level of a serf, they would still go on pilgrimages. They would still go to shrines that were miles and miles and miles from their homes. And that was a form of travel. In fact, that was probably the most common form of traveling in the Middle Ages. That brings us full circle back to Geoffrey Chaucer, right? So Geoffrey Chaucer's tale, the Canterbury Tales, is all about a very ragtag group of people going on pilgrimage. And they're having fun, right? This isn't some solemn occasion. They're having fun along the way. And that is generally how pilgrimages were. You went in a group and you had fun along the way. And there was like this medieval concept of what happens on pilgrimage stays on pilgrimage. Because the whole point of a pilgrimage was to go to a shrine and get absolved of your sins. So there seems to have been some kind of idea that, well, whatever we do on the way to the pilgrimage is going to be absolved anyway, so we might as well do it. And I don't mean, horrible things like killing people randomly. I mean, you know what I mean. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Brandon, welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining us. If you're enjoying this medieval story time, don't forget to double tap that screen and consider subscribing. And I hope you'll be my new subscriber. Oh, Parth, hello. Thank you for joining us from India. Welcome to Daegu, South Korea. We're here at the governor's palace in Daegu, 17th century. Isn't it beautiful? It's been reconstructed and touched up and whatnot, so it's in pristine state right now. You can see what a 17th century building looked like in 1602 when it was built. Okay, back to traveling in the Middle Ages. So this gentleman, Panuccio, right, he travels a lot, and he's traveling because it's business. Italy is by the 13th century, Italy is a thriving commercial region because Italy is not a country. There's lots of different city-states. There's principalities, there are duchies, there are counties, there are, there's the papal states, there are city-states, there are republics. You've got Genoa, Venice, Florence, right? These are all republics. So there are a lot lordships. There's a lot of different micro-states in what is now Italy. So it was not one unified state. It wasn't one unified culture. It wasn't even unified by a language, because the Italian that was spoken all over the Italian peninsula was in some cases different enough to not be mutually intelligible at times. So people traveled, especially for business, but also for political reasons. Now, mostly it was men who were traveling. I will grant you 100%, with the exception of pilgrimages when women did go on pilgrimage. Business travel was mostly men. So these gentlemen, Panuccio and Adriano, travel a lot apparently for business, and they probably stopped at this inn the first time on their way somewhere else. And at that point, Panuccio developed an instant respect for Nicoletta, and therefore they've decided to stop there every other time. Now, what's funny about this story is that we basically reach the point at which the relationship is going to be consummated, right? Okay, questions. Let's see. Who was the governor of this palace? The first governor? The name is on the plaque over there. I don't know. So basically, this. Let me show you the park. Hold on. Right, so that over there is actually the governor's palace itself, like where he actually lived, and behind me, our government is one of the government buildings, right? So basically, this is during the Joseon dynasty, and Daegu became the capital of Gyeongsang, the province of Gyeongsang, in the early 17th century, like 1604, I think it said. So the capital was moved from Andong, which is north of here, to here, and this new palace was built. So I don't know who the governor was at that time, but he was a nobleman. He was a representative of the king of Joseon here in this very southerly part of the peninsula. Yep. So beautiful Japanese style. So actually, no. So both Japan and Korea were heavily influenced by China, by the Middle Kingdom, as it was called in its own language at the time. But the style, although heavily influenced by the Chinese imperial style, they localized in both places. So Japan has its own specific style and Korea has its own specific style. And if I lined up the buildings side by side, a Chinese palace building, a Japanese palace building from this era, and a Korean palace building from this era, you could see the differences. But I can see how at casual glance you might think that they're, the same. But they are definitely not the same. They're very similar though, I would say. Yep. Okay, so moving to the story. So here we are, Nicoletta and Panuccio, the heat of affection thus increasing day by day. Panuccio grew increasingly, exceedingly desirous to enjoy the fruits of his long continued liking. I just love these euphemisms so much. The liking. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And diverse devises mustered in his brain, how he might compass one night's lodging in her father's house, whereof he knew every part and parcel. So basically, during the course of this courtship, he has spent so much time in this house that he knows it like the back of his hand, every part and parcel. And so he is convinced that he can come up with a scheme whereby no matter where he ends up in the house, he can find his way to Nicoletta. But it happens that this is a very poor house. It's a small house. It's a mean house. Mean in 17th century English does not mean cruel. It means simple, it means unsophisticated, it means poor, really, right? So this is not a great home. This is not a great, beautiful, giant inn with luxurious facilities. This is not a place a king would lodge himself, for instance. So, they actually have to come up with a reason why two gentlemen from Florence, the great city in the swamp, would come and stay in this mean house. And they do. They come up with a scheme, and here's the scheme. Okay, hiring 2 horses and having portmanteaus. A portmanteau in this case literally means a thing that carries your mantle. And so they're basically giant, they're trunks, right? Having portmanteaus behind them filled with matters of no moment. So what that means is they basically put a bunch of crap in these chests because it's all a ruse. They're not actually going anywhere. They have these chests behind them in carts so that it looks like they're actually going somewhere, right? They have set up this elaborate ruse. They have packed the horses, they've packed trunks with nothing important. Like God knows they just put, who knows, a bunch of sheets in it. It would be like some child trying to trick his mother into thinking he's really going to school, but he just puts a bunch of toilet paper in his backpack because he's actually going to skive off and go play hooky somewhere, right? Like it's a similar idea here, and he's about that level of maturity in some ways, right? So they fill the portmanteaus with matters of no moment, and they depart from Florence as if they have some great journey to ride. Having spent the day where themselves best pleased, right? Because they're not going far. But the key is they need to arrive at nighttime. So basically they just skive off. They just flitter about so that they can time their arrival for late at the house of the host, Nicoletta's house, right? So when the host opens the door, Panuccio spake in this manner to him: Good man, we must request one night's lodging with you, for we thought to have reached so far as Florence. So they pretend that they're going back to Florence. That's the funniest part. They've actually just come from Florence, but they're pretending to go back to Florence. So this is the Decameron. Oh, we're not mirrored. Sorry, everyone. I don't know if I can mirror it. I can't, sorry. So this is the Decameron by Boccaccio, and this is a fantastic edition by, let me see, the name of the press is Easton Press. Easton Press edition. It's leather bound. I love this version of the book. It's really fantastic. You can usually find these on A-Books. This is where we got ours. Yeah, totally welcome, Brandon. Yeah, highly recommend this book. It is hysterical, really. And again, this story's tasteless. There are stories more tasteless in it. Oh gosh, I just snorted. Yeah, he sounds like a scoundrel somewhat. Richard, he is a scoundrel. That he is, my dear. That he is. Right, so they arrive there and he says, but dark night preventing us, you see at what late hour we are come hither. So basically he's saying, well, we planned poorly, so we're not going to make it. Signor Panuccio, answered the host, it is not unknown to you how unfitting my poor house is for entertaining such guests as you are. Right, so the host, and this also gives us a little bit of an insight into the psychology of people in the 14th century in Italy. It's different than now, right? We are especially in the West, we are much less aware of distinctions of class, and we don't care about them, right? We don't feel embarrassed generally if a rich person comes to our house. We think, well, you're coming to my house, you should be grateful that I'm hosting you, right? But here, the host is giving us a glance into the medieval idea of hierarchy and how it was respected, almost as a reflex. Because the host actually says, my home isn't good enough for you, actually. And you know it. He actually says to Panuccio, you know that this is not the proper place for you. But there's no alternatives, so I will do what I can for you. But in this case, there's a big distinction, a big difference between, the developed West especially and 14th century West. Oh, Broody. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the host offers to put them up for the night. When they were dismounted from their horses and entered, I love that instead of entered, into the simple inn, having taken order for feeding their horses, and they accepted such provision as the place and time afforded, requesting the host to sup with them. So this is something that in the modern world we don't think about. Now when you drive somewhere, you just park your car and you leave it. You don't need to feed it. You don't need to make sure that it has water. You don't need to make sure it's tended to. You don't need to make sure it has a roof over its head. But before cars took over, up until the 19th century, there were livery stables in cities. So when you rode into a city or a town, there would be, usually attached to the inn, you would actually, like now we pay for parking, then you paid to park your horse. And usually there was a stable keeper who would, keep an eye on all of the horses, would feed and water them, would make sure they weren't stolen, they would be tied up either in a stall if there were stalls, or maybe just to a rope, like a long rope where horses were kind of tied all together, right? So that's what a livery stable was. And those existed and were utilized up until the early 20th century in the West. And here we have, it's funny that, Boccaccio takes the time to mention that because it is just such an important part of daily life back then. You didn't just leave your horse standing there and go into the inn, right? You have to see to your horse first. So they took order for feeding their horses. They accepted such provision foods as the place and the time, being late at night, afforded. And then they invited the host to dine with them, right? So that is something that would not automatically happen. Normally, if you're at an inn as a guest, as a patron, the host doesn't dine with them, but they invite him to dine with them, which is actually nice, right? Now, I am to tell you that there was but one small chamber in the house. So this gets to the layout of medieval homes, and this is how it was for the majority of people. There was one small chamber, being a bedchamber is what they mean here. There was one small bedchamber in the house wherein stood 3 beds. So everyone in one room, mother, father, children, and guests, 3 beds in this one room. As best the host had devised to place them, 2 of them standing by the wall side, and the 3rd fronting them both, but with such close and narrow passage as very hardly could one step between them. So it was almost impossible to step between them. Right? And this is the stage for our the main action of the story. So it's a small room, and we've got 3 beds and a very little room to walk. That's what's happening. Oh, cats will be cats. Welcome back. Thank you. It's good to see you again. Ryan, appreciate that compliment. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate the compliments as always. Hello everyone. Tornado, it's good to see you again. Yeah, appreciate you joining us, Brandon. Welcome to the community. Yeah. Okay, everything about me is perfect. Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I assure you that is not the case. I'm too insightful and too self-aware to know that, to not know better. Am I a 17th century English peasant? I am not. I am actually dressed as a 15th century I am actually dressed as a 15th century Italian, Florentine, specifically patrician, as she would be dressed if she were at home. I'm actually not at home. I'm at the governor's palace in Daegu, which is 17th century, but no, this is a 15th century style kerchief, as they were called. And this is a 1470s to 1480s Florentine style ensemble, and we are reading a 14th century Italian book. Yep. Yep. Let me see. Am I a historian? I am a scholar of history. I don't have a PhD, so I don't know what you mean by historian. Some people mean, am I a PhD historian? No, but I'm about to start a PhD in fashion history, in fact. No, I'm a scholar of history, a lifelong scholar of history. I studied translation and interpretation and literature and art history back at university, so I have a bachelor's degree, but I do not have a PhD. But I have been a lifelong scholar, and I have a very large personal reference library filled with primary source works from the Middle Ages, from not just Europe, but from Korea as well, actually. So I'm a student of history, a perpetual student of history, shall we say. Yep. Okay, did I make my outfit? I made this outfit, and yeah, this book is great. I love this book so much. It's a great book. I made everything you see me wearing except for the gem itself, the jewelry. Jewelry I buy from Armor and Castings, armorandcastings.com. Fantastic website for replica medieval and Renaissance pieces. But everything else I made, not only did I make it, I patterned it myself. So I don't use commercial patterns either. And if on this channel, if you check out after this live stream, I have a large number of tutorials on how to make a variety of medieval garments, showing you my process from the very beginning of laying out and cutting the pieces to the final finishing stages. I also have a bunch of getting dressed videos. If you're interested to know what it takes to get dressed in an ensemble like this, I have detailed getting dressed videos, also complete with historical commentary to explain what's happening at each stage. So yeah. Mang Kepweng, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so back to the inn. We are, just some of those joining us, we are reading a story from Il Decameron, the Decameron, the actual Decameron, not the garbage thing that's on Netflix. We are reading The Ninth Day, the 6th novel, and we've already done a complete read through, so now we are going through section by section and exploring all the different passages, where I'm explaining any details that are not clear to a modern audience, and of course, answering your questions. Yep. Am I interested in the Republic of Genoa? Of course. I mean, Genoa in the 14th and 15th century is very powerful and very interesting. Yep, 100%. In fact, I think I just purchased a book written about 15th century Genoese, this 15th century Genoese fashion. Or it will talk about it anyway, yeah. Yep. Okay, so To the chamber. So we have this chamber, and there are 3 beds in it. The best of these beds was appointed for the gentlemen, and therein they laid them down to rest. And some of you may recognize that term of phrase. And now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. So I lay me down. Therein they laid them down to rest. English used to be a reflexive verb language. In modern English, we've almost gotten rid of those reflexive pronouns, but there's such a beautiful poetry about using it here. So they laid them down to rest, but sleep they could not, albeit they dissembled it very formally. Dissembling means to pretend. Formally doesn't mean in a stiff official manner. Here it means to form perfectly, very well. They made a very good show of sleeping, basically. So they dissembled sleep very formally. In the second bed was Nicoletta, the daughter, lodged by herself, and the father and mother in the third, where the cradle stood by the bed, right? So it's all laid out, right? The stage is set. This should be easy peasy, right? Should be easy peasy. Comment, cute necklace, magic style. Oh, thank you. So this is a replica of a gem that was owned and worn by Beatrice d'Este. She was one of the Este sisters. She was a princess from Ferrara. And she was a fashion trendsetter in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. And this is a replica of one that is depicted on her in several different portraits, and it is gorgeous. It's $80 for Armor and Castings. I don't know if it's been tagged in this video or not, but if you go to their website, armorandcastings.com, use the code Contessa10, one word, you will get an extra 10% off. And no, this is glass. This is not a real sapphire. This is not a real ruby. The pearls are real freshwater pearls though. Yeah, they do amazing work. They really do. Okay, so Panuccio, having subtly observed all this and in what manner they went to bed after such a space of time, as he imagined them to all be fast asleep, he arose very softly, and stealing to the bed of Nicoletta, lay down gently by her. Right. And albeit she seemed somewhat afraid at first, yet when she perceived who it was, she rather bade him welcome than shewed herself anyway discontented. So Nicoletta's quite happy that this is what has happened. Whether or not they discussed it explicitly, clearly this was what they both hoped would happen. Right. Now, while Panuccio continued thus with the maid, imaginations run away, right? The cat, I love this phrasing. It fortuned that the cat threw down somewhat in the house. Do any of you have cats? This is one of my favorite lines in the 14th century. The cat threw down somewhat in the house. Do any of you have cats? This is classic cat, right? It's the middle of the night. Everyone's supposed to be sleeping. Everyone should be asleep. It should be quiet. And the cat breaks something, right? The cat threw down somewhat. Somewhat means something, right? The cat threw something down, knocked something down. It's classic cat. But the other thing that indicates, so some of you have asked me, well, what about cats? Did people have cats? Yes. Not only did they have cats, but they kept them in the house. There's this weird myth going around that medieval people didn't keep pets, that they had cats, but they lived outside and they didn't keep them in the house. No. Not only did they keep them in the house, there was a book of etiquette from the 15th century from England that talks about, and it's a book of etiquette that is basically teaching a father teaching a son how to be a good servant, how to be the best servant to a king. And some of the advice he gives, one of the pieces of advice he gives is before your sovereign goes to bed, you need to make sure that the cats and the dogs are out of the chamber. Any of you do that? I do that before I go to bed. I make sure all the cats are out of the bedroom, because if I don't, I will be awake at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and 5 a.m. successively, right? So I love that book of etiquette from the 15th century England talks about getting rid of the cats and dogs before your sovereign goes to bed. And I love that here in this story from 14th century Italy, we have the cat throwing down somewhat in the house. It's fantastic. Yeah. So, okay. So the cat threw down somewhat. So the noise whereof awakened the wife, and fearing greater harm than indeed had happened, she arose without a candle. And right, Haas, this is that part you were talking about, right? She arose without a candle. Again, why? She goes groping around in the dark towards the place where she heard the noise. Again, candles are crazy expensive in this era. These are beeswax candles. Beeswax candles are expensive now. The only reason other kinds of candles are cheap is because paraffin is an oil base, it's petroleum based. Paraffin is cheap, although it might get less cheap here real shortly. Paraffin is cheap, soy is cheap. In the pre-modern world, they didn't have paraffin candles, they didn't have soy candles. Beeswax was the only kind of candle, and beeswax was very expensive. And especially the clearer and lighter, more refined the beeswax was, the more expensive it was, because actually the lighter the beeswax is, lighter in color, the brighter it burns. It actually makes a brighter light because the light reflects out of it. Anyway, beeswax candles, very expensive. So she doesn't need to use a candle because she can grope around in the dark. She knows her way around, right? This is her home. She doesn't need light. So, no candle. Does she need light? Yes, she does actually. Yeah. If she had, here's the thing. If she had lit a candle, the whole scheme would have been undone. She would have seen Panuccia with her daughter. She wouldn't have ended up in Adriano's bed, right? Like the whole scheme would have been undone. But because of medieval thrift, pre-modern thrift, the story continues in its trajectory. Adriano, who had no other meaning but well, found occasion also to rise about some natural necessity, and making his passage in the dark, stumbled on the child's cradle in the way where the woman had set it, and being unable to pass by, remember the beds are all so close together that you can't actually get past it, he moves it from its place, takes it, and sets it by his own bedside. And having done the business for which he arose, he returned to his bed, never remembering to set the cradle where he first found it. Okay, so some of you may be asking yourselves, okay, so his natural business, he needs to pee. Nighttime nature calls, right? So where does he go and do it? So in this era, no, they didn't have flushing toilets in most places in the world. There are a few places that still had flushing toilets kind of functioning from the Roman Empire. This is not one of those places. But they had chamber pots, and they actually had urinals. So a urinal was actually a small clay bowl, jar, that would actually be nailed to the wall. And it was just right sized for male plumbing. So not something that women could use. And it had a storage, it had a receptacle on the bottom for urine, because urine in this era, welcome to the Contessa's lecture on the value of urine in the medieval era. Urine in the Middle Ages was very, very valuable. It was not a waste product. It was a byproduct of human existence that was highly valuable, because urine was used in so many industrial processes in the Middle Ages. It was used for dyeing, it was used for bleaching fabric, it was used in multiple stages of wool production, it was used in tanning. And so households would actually purposefully collect their urine. They would not throw it out. The idea of taking a chamber pot full of urine and throwing it into the street, you're literally throwing away money, because you can sell that urine. That urine will be bought by any number of people, by laundresses, by dyers, by weavers, by tanners. And so there were actually urinals and we have they've survived. So I actually have medieval potter friends who make replica medieval urinals. How fun is that? And you can buy them. And they were nailed to the wall, and men would use them. And tavern keepers, and this is a tavern, remember, this is an inn. So he actually probably had multiple of these nailed to the outside of his home on the outside of the inn, because the idea is that was where men knew they could go and relieve themselves, because everyone knew that innkeepers always had urinals, and then the innkeepers would sell the urine that they collected in the urinals that they provided. So probably he actually went outside, maybe even to go and use a urinal outside, or maybe there was one inside as well. But either way, it would have been by the next day someone would have come around to collect it and to buy the urine, probably. Yeah. So we have Adriano comes back. He's moved the cradle. He doesn't move the cradle back. So now The woman, it's dark, and the hostess returns, and she's judging what bed is the right bed based on where the cradle is. Well, now the cradle is by Adriano's bed, and Adriano is all alone, right? Because Panuccio is with Nicoletta, continuing in this manner, as Boccaccio cleverly says. Paul Taruk, welcome. Marcus Cook, hello, thank you for joining us. For those just joining, welcome to my medieval story time. I am the Contessa, the creative Contessa. We are reading a story from the Decameron, from Il Decamerone. We are reading the novel, the 6th novel on the 9th day, as translated from the 14th century Italian in the 17th century into 17th century English by John Florio. And we are now at the stage whereby the shenanigans are really going to commence. Right, so the wife having found the thing thrown down, being of no value or moment, typical cat, right? Sometimes the cats will go and knock an expensive glass off of the counter and shatter it. That happens to me all the time. Or sometimes the cats will just knock down some piece of whatever and it doesn't matter. Either way, you get up to check. So apparently the cat threw down something of no value. Again, the wife cared not for lighting any candle. Candles crazy expensive in this era. You don't light them if you don't really need to. But berating the cat, so she berates the cat, you know, she tells the cat, bad cat, bad cat. How many of you have cats? Does it ever help to berate your cat? Does it ever affect any change in their behavior whatsoever? No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. They're cats. Brandon, appreciate that compliment. Right, so she returns back, feeling the bed, feeling for the bed where her husband lay. Again, she didn't want to light any candles. And she said to herself, what foolish woman am I? I cannot tell myself what I do. Instead of my husband's bed, I'm going to both of my guests, right? No, well, she wasn't. She was going to the right bed, but now she's not. So she finds the cradle, she lays herself down by Adriano, thinking she has gone to her husband. Adriano, being not yet fallen asleep, feeling the hostessa in bed with him, took advantage of so fair an occasion offered, and what he did is no business of mine. As I heard, neither found the woman any fault. So apparently, the woman enjoys what then proceeds to happen. Now, apparently, if we find out later, she didn't realize this wasn't her husband. I don't know about you, but I think we can all tell the difference of a shape of a person in the dark. Anyway, Panuccio, fearing lest sleep seizing on him, he might disgrace the maid's reputation, taking his kind farewell of her with many kisses and sweet embraces, returned again to his own bed. It's really considerate of him, right? Like, seriously, things could have gone badly if everyone had awoken and Panuccio had been found in her bed, right? Even for an innkeeper's daughter, reputation does matter. So he returns to his own bed, but meeting the cradle in his way and thinking it stood by the host's bed, as it truly did so at first, went back to the cradle and stepped into the hostess' bed indeed, who awakened upon his very entrance, albeit he had slept very soundly before. So the host is now awake. Panuccio is awake. Panuccio is, as we recall, a gallant young gentleman. So he is not the brightest crayon in the box, right? I mean, he's savvy, he's crafty, he's cunning, but he's not necessarily sensible. So the host, of course, gets very upset because Panuccio gets in bed and thinking that it's Adriano who's in bed, he of course does. Men, come on, man. You don't kiss and tell. Panuccio kisses and tells. Panuccio kisses and tells real badly. This is what Panuccio says. He says, I protest to thee, Adriano, as I am a gentleman, Nicoletta is a dainty, delicate wench. And this is one of my favorite, funniest turns of phrases. Another one in this book. The cat threw down somewhat. Nicoletta is a dainty, delicate wench. So I have to expand the word wench. Wench in 16th and 17th century English does not have the connotations that it has now. It is not pejorative. It is not meant to be a slander upon Nicoletta, right? It's just, it's like chick. It's kind of like chick, like calling someone a cute chick. It's along those lines. So she's a dainty, delicate wench. Like, it's a compliment. And worthy to be a very good man's wife, right? But not his, right? She's not worthy to be his wife because she's not high enough on the socioeconomic ladder. This night she hath given me the sweetest entertainment. The word entertainment gets used in such a fantastically general fashion that it seems to cover everything from eating dinner, like really eating dinner, to sex. Great, fantastic category. The sweetest entertainment, as the best prince in the world can wish no better. And I have kissed her most kindly for it. Kissed her. I mean, how nice of him to kiss her. The host, hearing these news, which seemed very unwelcome to him, said first to himself, "What makes such a devil here in my bed?" Afterward, being more rashly angry than well advised, he said to Panuccio, "Canst thou make vaunt of such a monstrous villainy? Or thinkest thou that heaven hath no due vengeance in store to requite all wicked deeds of darkness? If all should sleep, yet I have courage sufficient to right my wrong, and yet as old as I am, thou shalt be sure to find it." Right, so here we have this gentleman who's clearly elderly, and he's elderly, and yet he's going to avenge his daughter's honor. So Panuccio, this is an opportunity for Panuccio, right? He could pretend any number of things here. He's too stupid. He's too dumb to do that, though. Our amorous Panuccio, being none of the wisest young men in the world, perceiving his error, sought not to amend it. Neither with some quaint strain of wit, carried in quick and cleanly manner, but instead he gets angry too. Like, he has no right to be angry. He has no right to be offended. He is the offender in this household. And yet. Thank you, Dibbin Duck. Welcome to my channel. And Brandon, thank you for that lovely compliment. And yet, he says, "What shall I find that thou darest do to me? Am I any way afraid of thy threatenings?" Right. The hostess, imagining she was in bed with her husband, said to Adriano, "Hark, husband, I think our guests are quarreling together. I hope they will do no harm to one another." Adriano is not dissembling. He just lets it. He's like, I'm not even going to pretend here. Adriano says, laughing outright, "Let them alone and become friends again as they fell out. Perhaps they drank too much yesternight." Well, now the cat's out of the bag, pun intended. The woman, perceiving that it was her husband that quarreled, and distinguishing the voice of Adriano from his, knew presently where she was, and with whom. Wherefore, having wit at will, and desirous to cloud an error unadvisedly committed, and with no willing consent of herself, without returning any more words, presently she rose, and taking the cradle with the child in it, removed it thence to her daughter's bedside, although she had no light to help her, and afterward went to bed to her daughter, where, if she were but newly wakened, she called to her husband to understand what angry speeches had passed between him and Panuccio. So the wife gets up quietly, cleverly grabs her baby's cradle, moves it to her daughter's bedside, pretends that she's been in bed with her daughter this whole time. And this is common, so I know some of you may be thinking all kinds of naughty things, but that's not how it was in the pre-modern world. Up until the 20th century in the West, everywhere in the world, whole families would share beds, right? Not in a sexual way. You couldn't afford more than one bed, so everyone slept in it. And that is absolutely true in the Middle Ages. People slept together, they just shared a bed. It had nothing to do with any kind of entertainment. It was just sleeping. And so it was very common that, especially, God knows, if this host is actually an older gentleman, he probably snores like a bear. And so it's likely that the hostess, his wife, probably has often moved to a different bed just to escape that. So this is not hard to sell, basically. This is not a hard sell to convince the husband that this is what has happened. So she wakes up and she pretends that she doesn't know what's happening. And she says, "Husband, what angry speeches are passing between you and Panuccio?" And the host replies, "Didst thou not hear him, wife, brag and boast how he hath lien this night with our daughter Nicoletta?" "Husband," quoth she, "he is no honest gentleman if he should say so, and believe me, it is a manifest lie, for I am in bed with her myself, and never yet closed mine eyes together since the first hour I laid me down. It is unmannerly done of him to speak it, and you are a little less than a loggerhead, if you do believe it." So she's basically, at this point, it's one big group gaslighting. At this point, it is a group conspiracy. This poor host, it is a big group conspiracy. And this actually recalls a story, well, several stories, but one in particular from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the tale of the miller's tale, right? Where the wife has a lover, and one lover she wants, and she has another suitor who's courting her, and she doesn't want him. And then they convince her husband that there's going to be this flood, so he ends up in a rowboat suspended from the crane for the attic where the merchant supplies end up being stored. And so basically akin to that, this is one big group conspiracy to hoodwink the host. So, she says, "This proceedeth from your bibbing and swilling yesternight." So she takes it to the next level. She's blaming him. So he's getting victim shamed, basically. Victim blamed. "This proceedeth from your bibbing and swilling yesternight, when you supped with our guests, right? You drank too much, which seemeth to me maketh you to walk about the room in your sleep, dreaming of wonders in the night season. It were no great sin if you break your neck to teach you keep a fairer quarter." So basically she's saying this should teach you to drink less, right? So it is hysterical, but it's also horrifying what these people are doing to him. Right. How cometh to pass that Signor Panuccio could not keep himself in his own bed? Right. Adriano, perceiving how wisely the woman excused her own shame and her daughter's to back her in a business so cunningly begun, he calls to Panuccio, saying, "Have I not told thee 100 times that thou art not fit to lie anywhere out of thine own lodging? What a shame is this base imperfection to thee, by rising and walking thus in the nighttime, according to as thy dreams do wantonly delude thee, and cause thee to forsake thy bed, telling nothing but lies and fables, yet avouching them for manifest truths." Right, so Adriano just jumps into the gaslighting. He jumps into the conspiracy, feet forward, he's all in. And he basically, brings Panuccio into the fold. Panuccio, who's not the brightest crayon in the box in these matters anyway. Panuccio does, though, pick up what's being put down, and he basically joins into this big hoodwinking, and they all convince the host, basically. The host was verily persuaded that Panuccio spake in a dream all this while, and to make it the more constantly apparent, Panuccio, being now grown wiser by others' examples, lay talking and blundering to himself, even as if dreams and perturbations of the mind did much molest him with strange distractions in frantic manner. Which, the host perceiving and compassionating his case, as one man should do another's, he took him by the shoulders, jogging him and hunching him, saying, "Awake, Signor Panuccio, and get you gone hence to your own bed." Okay, looks like Korea. You are correct. Where is this being broadcast? We are in Daegu, South Korea. We are at the governor's palace. Actually, just give you a look, everyone. The governor's palace. It's quite a lovely space, and over across the courtyard. Yeah, so we are here in Daegu, South Korea. Persuaded. Yeah. And I am reading, I'm dressed in 15th century Florentine attire, reading from a 15th century Florentine book, a great masterpiece by Giovanni Boccaccio called Il Decameron, the Decameron. And we are reading the ninth day, the sixth novel, and we are about to reach the end of it. Yes, so yes, we are in Korea. You are correct. Right. Okay, so Panuccio, yawning and stretching out his limbs with unusual groanness and respirations, such as better could be hardly dissembled, seemed to wake as out of a trance. calling his friend Adriano, said, "Adriano, is it day that thou dost waken me?" Right? So, there's a lot of interesting details here. First off, sleepwalking, not a new concept. They present it as being a very commonplace thing indeed, and utilize it as part of this great hoodwinking, of this conspiracy, of this gaslighting of the host, the owner of the inn, the innkeeper. Right? And Panuccio falls right in, claims that he must have been, pretends that he's delusional, that he's talking to himself in his sleep. Right? And then feigning, pretending to be much troubled and sleepy, he arose from the host and went to Adriano's bed. Right? And when it was day, the host began to smile at Panuccio and mocked him with his idle dreaming and talking in the night. Right? And so, falling from one merry matter to another, yet without any mislike at all, the gentlemen, having their horses prepared and their portmanteaus fastened behind, drinking to their host, toasting to their host. And of course, this is an ironic toasting. This is a sardonic, acerbic toasting, because basically both Adriano and Panuccio enjoyed a very lovely evening with two very lovely ladies. No doubt the wife of this innkeeper is much younger than he is. Remember, I told you that men in Italy in this era tend not to marry until they're in their 30s, and in some cases 40s. And they're marrying women who are in their late teens or early 20s. So no doubt the hostess is still a dainty wench, a delicate dainty wench, and probably quite lovely. So Adriano and Panuccio have enjoyed a very nice evening of entertainment, and they basically thank the host by toasting him, and the host thinks they're just thanking him for just putting them up. Yeah. Classy men. And they mount on horseback and rode away towards Florence, no less contented with the manner of occasions happened than the effects they sorted to. And afterward, other courses were taken for the continuance of this begun pleasure with Nicoletta, who made her mother believe that Panuccio did nothing else but dream. And the mother herself, remembering how kindly Adriano had used her, a fortune not expected by her before, was more than half a mind that she did then dream also while waking, which doesn't say anything good about the host, about the innkeeper. Apparently Adriano is a much more considerate lover than the innkeeper, and so the mother, remembering how kindly Adriano had used her, a fortune not expected by her before, really begins to question whether she hadn't dreamed it all in any case. Yeah. So, okay. So, thus concludes the 9th day, the 6th novel of Giovanni Boccaccio's masterpiece of folk history, basically. This is, if you ever want to get an idea about what daily life was like in medieval Italy, you can really get it through the Decameron. Some of the stories are actually like swashbuckling tales of fantasy and daring do, and those are obviously not going to give you an idea about daily life. But the stories like this, set in modest, humble settings like these inns and taverns and people's private homes in the public square, these give you an idea of how people lived their lives, how they interacted, and also into a bit of their psychology. So it's one of the reasons I really love these stories so much. Yep. Teku ergo, tea, love the tea, gotta love the tea, absolutely love tea. Here in Korea, this is tea country, my friends. Probably from here I'm going to go to a beautiful, hear me out everyone, a Starbucks that's around the corner from here that looks like this, that is built in a building in this style, and have some beautiful organic Jeju green tea, right, to wet my pate. In fact, my condottiero actually brought me water, and then I forgot it. I forgot to drink it at all. Yeah, but this, you have to understand, the Starbucks here is nothing like the Starbucks elsewhere. Starbucks in Korea is highly localized. They sell local baked goods, they sell drinks that are localized to the Korean market, and they sell actual green tea that is grown here in Korea locally, and it's organic. And it's one of the best places to get green tea in Korea, ironically, is from Starbucks. Yeah, you heard me right, everyone. Yeah, Asia is the best. Love it. Okay, are there any questions about today's story time? Any questions about the Decameron? Have any of you seen the Decameron on Netflix? Just out of curiosity, if you have, you may have noticed it's nothing like this. And if you've been watching and are enjoying, please double tap that screen and subscribe. For those who don't know, I have a Patreon. You can become a patron on Patreon. Host of excess perks that way. Lots of extra footage, extra videos that are not available to anyone else. Extra posts, extra resources about daily life in the Middle Ages. Ad-free videos are available on Patreon as well. I have YouTube channel membership for people who prefer that ecosystem. Again, extra perks. Extra videos, extra footage, and access to my private Creative Contessa Discord server where I interact directly with my patrons and channel members, and I share extra resources. We chat about projects, we ask questions, and we learn from each other, and sometimes we just laugh and have a good time. So if you would like access to any of that, consider becoming a channel member or a patron on Patreon. Yeah. Okay, any final questions, anyone? Next time, I think I'm going to be reading possibly a tale of Nicoletta and one of the dastardly villains in the Decameron, in the stories of the Decameron, a horrible, horrible man named Calandrino, who is described as having teeth like the pegs of a gittern. Look up what a gittern is, look at the pegs, and that will give you the visual. It's a musical instrument. The pegs are the tuning pegs. Yeah. You're welcome. And then also I actually have, for the next medieval story time, I also have some readings from original medieval sources and chroniclers that help cast a light on what life was like in the Middle Ages from a primary source perspective, from the eyes of people who lived and wrote in the time and about the things they did in their daily lives. So we'll be looking into that. Yep. Yeah, so yeah, so otherwise, everyone, any final questions before we part ways for the day? Don't forget to hit the notification bell also and click all if you actually want to be notified when I go live. Unfortunately, YouTube has a disturbing habit of resetting the notification settings and or deciding when you want to see things, receive notifications rather than when you want to receive notifications. Yeah, Pamela Lilo, thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you in our next medieval story time. Tomorrow at, let me see, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Seoul Standard Time, which will be 6 a.m. New York City time or noon Europe, your Africa-ish time, I will be doing a medieval cooking party. We're going to be exploring a 15th century Italian stuffed egg dish. We're going to be looking at the original recipe and working through it step by step, recreating this dish from 15th century Naples. And this is a fantastic stuffed egg dish. It's basically like if you take a kind of deviled egg, but much more sophisticated, and then you fry it, and then you coat it in a sauce that is made of the leftover egg yolks. So completely different spicing and flavor profile than modern deviled eggs. So it's a really delicious recipe. I've never made it before. I've been wanting to make it for years. So we're gonna make it together during my mini. Okay, we reconnected. Sorry about that. I have no idea why we just disconnected and reconnected. Anyway, if you're interested in checking out what medieval food was like and explore the process with me, I will be using a combination of medieval equipment and modern equipment because I don't have all of my replica medieval equipment here. Unfortunately, a lot of it is still is in storage in the US. We're technically only here on vacation, so yeah. Okay, everyone, I hope to see you all tomorrow or at a later medieval sewing party or medieval story time. Until next time, everyone, may your historical adventures be creative. Bye, everyone.